Imagine building a weapon so devastating it literally permanently alters human history, right? But here's the catch. You have to do it in absolute secrecy. So secretly, in fact, that the tens of thousands of people actually putting it together have no idea what they're even making. Well, from 1942 to 1945, the Manhattan Project pulled off exactly that. In this explainer, we're diving into that pivotal moment where the race for the nuclear bomb slammed headfirst into deep social issues, redefining the entire 20th century. We're going to unpack the mind-bending science, the massive secret cities, and the very dawn of the Cold War arms race. Let's get into it. So how do you build a weapon that changes the world in absolute secrecy? It's a wild question because it points to the sheer absurdity of the whole situation. You've got tens of thousands of people working on a project they don't even begin to understand. Picture yourself pouring concrete, laying foundations, or, I don't know, turning dials day in and day out without a single clue as to what the final product actually is. It was just this unprecedented logistical and security puzzle. The government somehow had to mobilize a massive workforce to harness nuclear fission, which, remember, previously only existed as a highly theoretical concept in labs, and they had to do the whole thing completely under the radar. And that massive effort was anchored by the number three, specifically three main hidden cities built entirely from scratch: Los Alamos, Hanford, and Oak Ridge. The government basically scoured the country looking for super remote locations that could actually handle their massive demands for space, water, and resources. We're not just talking about throwing up a few hidden laboratories. They constructed booming metropolitans out in the wilderness, almost overnight, and then they literally erased them from public maps. Seriously, if you looked at a map in 1944, these massive cities, they simply didn't exist. The race for the bomb was fueled by incredible urgency and insane geopolitical stakes right in the thick of World War II. It really kicks off back in 1939, when physicists Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard warned FDR that German scientists had discovered fission. Terrified that the Nazis might develop a superweapon first, FDR immediately formed a uranium committee. Fast forward to September 1942, and General Leslie Groves takes command of the Manhattan Project. This is when things shift gears from just theoretical physics into massive physical production. But to build all this infrastructure, they desperately needed labor. This actually ties back to June 1941, when FDR signed Executive Order 8802, which banned discrimination in defense hiring and opened up these crucial jobs regardless of race. And that brings us to Oak Ridge, East Tennessee. Take a look at this map of the Clinton Engineer Works. It was a sprawling, makeshift metropolis built deep in the wilderness specifically to enrich uranium. You can see those massive K25, X10, and Y12 plants highlighted there in red. These incredible facilities had one job: producing the uranium-235 that was absolutely central to the bomb's function. But here's the problem. They were competing directly with other wartime efforts for labor. Relying solely on the local white workforce just wasn't going to cut it if they wanted to meet the project's staggering demands. So to build these plants at lightning speed, the government leaned hard on that Executive Order 8802 you see here, hiring thousands of African-American laborers who were absolutely desperate for work following the Great Depression. I mean, at the time, Black unemployment in the region was hovering around 50%. That's double the national average. So recruiters fanned out all across the South, promising high wages, stable jobs, and housing. And it worked. Thousands flocked to this new frontier, rolling in on government buses to lay the literal foundations of the atomic age. But the deep social paradox of Oak Ridge is honestly fascinating. Here's a place developing the most cutting-edge science on the planet, yet it's built on highly regressive, segregated foundations. The journalist Enoch Waters hit the nail on the head with this quote. He said, "The concept back of the planning and operation of this small city is as backwards sociologically as the atomic bomb is advanced scientifically." It's such a striking contrast. The technology was literally pushing human capability into the future, but the social structure, it was firmly rooted in the racist, segregationist policies of the time. Because despite the federal government's official ban on discrimination in defense hiring, the reality on the ground was starkly different. The contrast really was jarring. On one side of the coin, you had high wages and workplace integration. This was actually one of the very first examples of an integrated blue-collar jobs corps in the South. Black and white laborers were earning equal wages for equal work while constructing these vital plants. But flip the coin, and Black workers were being forced into these tiny, uninsulated 16 by 16 wooden hutments with zero plumbing, sharing communal bathhouses with up to 72 other people. It gets worse. Black women were forced to live completely apart from their families in heavily guarded, fenced-in pens under a strict 10 p.m. curfew. It was intense social control. Which brings us to the science and the climax. Because building the foundation, that was just the beginning. The scientific climax happened fast. The race was on. Back in late 1942, they set up a highly specialized research lab at Los Alamos just for bomb design. But by 1944, the scientists hit a massive wall. They realized a simple gun-type design, where you essentially just shoot two pieces of fuel together, it wasn't going to work for a plutonium bomb. It would just blow itself apart way too early. So that forced a frantic pivot to a highly complex, perfectly timed implosion method. All of this intense basic research, the frantic problem-solving, it all culminated on July 16, 1945, with the Trinity test in New Mexico, the first detonation of a nuclear device in human history. And then, just 3 short weeks later, in August, the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, let's talk about the unrecognized fallout. See that Trinity test in July 1945? It was kept entirely secret from the local New Mexico residents. They got absolutely zero warning about the massive radioactive fallout plume that was just sweeping right over their homes. And as you can see in this breakdown, decades later, serious scientific questions still remain. When you look at exposure, researchers are still trying to figure out the exact organ doses those local communities received. Then there's the health risk. How many cancers above the baseline actually occurred as a direct result of the fallout? And finally, the legacy. Whereas all the unfissioned plutonium that was left behind by the, let's be honest, relatively inefficient Trinity bomb, and what are its long-term health implications? Revealing the secret. Because in August 1945, that heavy veil of absolute secrecy was violently lifted. Just weeks after the destruction of Hiroshima, President Truman released what you're looking at here, the Smith Report. Written by H.D. Smith, this was literally the very first major unclassified publication on nuclear weapons. Now, our British and Canadian allies actually advised keeping this stuff classified, but the U.S. government felt they needed to inform the public discussion given the massive political and social questions this entirely new technology was raising. Suddenly, the invisible, top-secret world of Oak Ridge, Hanford, and Los Alamos was thrust right into the global spotlight. And astonishingly, this incredibly dense scientific document became an instant bestseller. It sold 127,000 copies. Can you imagine? The global public was just so desperate to wrap their heads around this terrifying new atomic reality that everyday people were literally devouring complex physics just to make sense of the world. The report went through 8 separate printings, explaining exactly what all those participating laboratories actually did in a way that was meant to reach way, way beyond just a handful of nuclear physicists. This brings us to the dawn of the atomic age. The Manhattan Project left behind a really complex legacy of contradictions that completely reshaped the 20th century. On a global scale, its sheer destructive power ushered in the Cold War and triggered a massive nuclear arms race. But at the exact same time, it pioneered the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And then there's this deeply fascinating social contradiction. Remember Oak Ridge? Because it was federally controlled, it actually broke with long-standing Southern tradition. In 1955, just 1 year after the Brown v. Board of Education decision, Oak Ridge became the very first school system in the entire South to desegregate, with 85 Black students integrating into the high school. It actually created a path for early civil rights milestones in the South. Practically everything we understand about modern geopolitics, clean energy, and even parts of 20th century social progress ties directly back to these makeshift secret towns. So I want to leave you with this thought. As we continue to navigate the modern threats and promises of our atomic age today, how does the atomic age, born out of broken dreams, extreme secrecy, and brilliant physics, continue to shape our modern world? Are we all still just living in the world that the Manhattan Project built?